Thanks, Andrea. And welcome everybody. It's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome and introduce Professor Monika Christmann. She's a German enology professor and the head of the Department for Enology and Wine Technology and the winery at the Hochschule Geisenheim University. She's also the author of numerous dissertations on wine research and technology, and she completed her BSc in beverage technology at Wiesbaden University of Applied Sciences in Geisenheim, followed by both the MSc degree in enology and a PhD in agricultural sciences at the Justus Liebig University Gießen. Monika has also served on the International Organization for Vine and Wine, the OIV, in various capacities since 1995, where she's now the honorary president, and she lectures in enology at the Hochschule Geisenheim University. She also applies her extensive wine knowledge by contributing to continuing professional training programs in countries around the world, and including lecturing for the Wine and Spirit Education Trust. Monika, very, very welcome together with your students and colleagues, and we look forward to listening to you. Over to you.
Well, thank you very much, and hello to everybody. It's quite a challenge at that time of the day that you have to listen to me to a topic which for some people might be a little bit boring, but I hope that I can make it a little bit interesting for you. So my presentation today will actually be two parts. First of all, we will talk about the OIV. What is it? What does it do? Because for some people, it seems to be a little bit something abstract. And then also, what are the current hot issues in Vitivini? And there I thought I use an example to show you what we are talking about. What are our problems here? Oops, sorry, something disappeared.
Your screen has gone off the slide, so you need that's it. You just need to push that button. That's it.
Okay.
That's it. Great.
So let's start with what is the OIV and how does it work? So if I ask a question, if I would ask all of you about this, we probably would get a lot of different answers because not very many people have really dived into that very deeply. And as I said, it seems to be something a little bit abstract. And I hear that very often, the OIV has decided and the OIV wants this and this, and that's not quite correct. So it's actually an international organization. It's an international intergovernmental organization, which means that only states can become a member. So it's not that private companies or persons, individuals can become members. It's only the states. That, for example, is a little bit the problem for the EU as an example, because the EU is not a state. So the EU cannot become a member, but they have a special observer status, and the different countries within the EU, and thankfully the UK is also back, they are members. As you can see here, that covers about all 5 continents. We just recently got the 50th member states, and we also cover more than 85% of the world wine production, which is quite a number. I hope I haven't forgotten any of the countries down there, but that seems to be, it's actually 50 members now. We also have some observers, and that's mainly, we have 2 in China. And just recently, last year, we got Texas. The US, they were a member, but they left some years ago. There was just some misunderstanding there. And now Texas has applied to become an observer, and that was granted. And now we have at least a little bit of a voice from the US there. What's the difference between members and observers? Observers can work in the same way as the members. They only don't have the right to vote. So that's the issue. They can bring in a lot of ideas, but they don't have the right to vote. Also, we have other associations, and I don't want to read through all of them here, but you can see, for example, very important FIFS is or Enopia or Minofed, AREF, and so a lot of different companies, organizations, which have a very strong influence on what's happening in the wine sector. So they, again, have the right to get all the papers, be part in all the discussions, but cannot vote. So, but of course, it's also important to work with other intergovernmental organizations. So, as I already mentioned, the European Union has a special observership, but also the FAO or the World Health Organization, the World Trade Organization, they all are partners, and certain things we do discuss with them. So, for example, when it comes to, let's say, new technologies, we will always consult our colleagues at Codex Alimentarius. And so we always have a reference to Codex Alimentarius that this is okay. And also the Codex Alimentarius decided when it comes to the technical questions of Vitivini, they will put a reference of the OIV in there. So like in the footnote. That I think is very good to work with. So what's the objective? It's very important to find a harmonization and adaptation of regulation by the members, because it really makes world trade much, much easier. And that's still a big issue, that there are different, let's say, understandings of what is okay and what is not okay. We also want to facilitate the mutual recognition of practices, which means the definition of vitivinicultural products and their specifications, what is okay to be used in enological practices. And you will see a little bit later, I come back to that. The method of analysis, you can imagine that if there are different methods of analysis and there might be a result which is not in line what you would expect, but they are not using the accepted method of analysis, there will always be a misunderstanding there. So this is important. Then also we want to promote and guide scientific and technical research. And also, this is getting even more important now, we want to have to promote the recognition of world wine and growing heritage. This is also important for the international wine business and competition. And in particular, the historical, cultural, human, social, and environmental aspects. And we give patronage to international scientific conferences and wine competition, so that everything is in line with that, what we think is okay. A lot of these OIV standards are directly integrated, implemented, but some of them indirect by bilateral or multilateral trade agreements. So what does that mean, for example? The EU has a very specific standard here, because the EU said, and I quote, that the competence of all the questions in Vitivini are actually at the OIV, and because this is where all the experts are located, and everything what is adopted in the OIV will more or less automatically become a part of the EU wine law. So this is a very specific situation for the EU, which also means that countries which are not, or states which are not member of the EU, they have a very strong influence on that's what's happening with the EU wine law, which I think is a very interesting point here. And everything in the OIV has to happen by consensus. So even when the smallest member state says, no, it's not going to happen, until we have found really a consensus there, until everybody is really happy with that, what we are deciding there. And here again, we are talking about the varieties and the synonyms for that, what kind of enological practices are okay, what are the specifications of enological products, what kind of analysis, and also, and that's going to be very important by the end of this year, labeling rules. That's a very, very demanding issue there. How does that happen? The decision-making process, as I said, every decision needs to be taken in consensus by the General Assembly and the Executive Committee. And the technical documents are worked on in 4 commissions and 2 subcommissions. Commission 1 is viticulture. Commission 2 is enology. Viticulture has a subcommission, which is unfermented table grapes. You will see that in a second. And enology has a subcommission, which is a method of analysis. Commission 3 is dealing with economy and law. Commission 4 with security and health. And as I just mentioned, the subcommissions there. We have 12 expert groups in total, and you can see that here. So the Commission 1, viticulture, here in green, you see that here we are talking about the genetics there, but about grapes in the subcommission, also what kind of protective measurements we can take, and in general about viticultural aspects there. In enology, it's the group of microbiology, technology, so what kind of new techniques are out there, and specification is dealing with, how does a product have to look like, what are the ingredients, is that in line with also, as I mentioned before, Codex Alimentarius. Then we have Commission 3 here, Eco-Law. There we are talking about, for example, education. We are talking about market, but also the legislation concerning labeling. And here you see that beverages, or there's still beverage based on grapes. And in Commission 4, Safety and Health, we have the consumer consumption and also food safety. And then you see here one, which has more than one color, and this is called Enviro. And this is a group which was installed just a few years ago, dealing with sustainability, climate change, and all the new things, what are actually happening out there in the market. So if I would ask you, what do you think when we have our meetings? They normally are about 2 weeks long. What do you think, how many people will get together there? Does anybody have an idea? 50, 100, 200? No idea. It's about 1,000 over. So this is why I'm saying they're really all the experts. So all the countries are sending their expert in the specific fields to discuss these issues. And you can believe me that when I say when something is really gone through the OIV, when it was accepted, when it was adopted, then that really has been proven very, very dramatically. And this is happening in a step procedure. And in the first step, it's introduced, then we write the preliminary resolution. This is then sent to the different member states. They will discuss that within the states. So here, for example, it would be discussed with all the education places, also with the different organizations. And then we come together and have a German voice, as all the other countries do that as well. And that will then be discussed in the next meeting. And there might be some modifications. And only in the last step, there will be then an acceptance of this. Some of the things go fairly quickly. So some years ago, for example, we had to talk about potentially allergenic residues in wine and find a limit that only took about a year. That went very, very, very fast. But then other things like, for example, the question of must concentration instead of chaptalization, that took about, again, another, and any idea? 2 years, 3 years? 27. It took 27 years because there were some countries completely against it, like Germany. Because for us, with our wine law at the time, it didn't fit somewhere. When you were doing a must concentration, it was still the same sugar content. It was still the same sugar in there, just in higher concentration, because we took out some water. And then the question was, what is it? It's still original sugar, but it has been modified. And finally, there was a conclusion that it will be treated the same way as a chaptalization. So, and then this went through, but it was hard work, believe me. So that's a little bit about the OIV. And now I would like to use an example to show you what are the hot issues currently in Vitivini. And I would like to use as an example cool climate wine styles, because this is a little bit, the focus right now. And very many countries are looking into products which are a little bit lower in alcohol, not so heavy anymore. And I would like to use that as an example. So when we ask what are cool climate wine styles, of course, you need to ask the consumer. And the consumer will say, okay, we have to have a little bit more acidity in there, lower to moderate alcohol levels. It's a little bit more particular for white wines, green apples, balanced, clean and fresh, and sometimes even with a little bit of residual sugar. And a good example for that is rosé wine. When we look at the development of production and sales of rosé wine over the years, it's dramatic. It's really increased a lot. The reason for that is that there was this, push for red wines, the French paradox. Everybody was interested in red wine, and there was a huge planting of red wines. And then the demand for red wines went down a little bit, but now we had these wonderful grapes available. And that really was the push for rosé wines, because in the past, and I'm exaggerating now a little bit, rosé wines, the grapes were not good enough to become a red wine. And that has really changed completely over the years now. So the question is, can only northern wine-growing regions produce these wines? And I think that northern Italy, but also now Portugal, are good examples. And when you went as an example to Pro wine, you can see that there are a lot of cool climate wines now from very warm areas. And as I already mentioned, there's a very strong increase of rosé wine production, also as an example for that kind of wine style. So, but what is the direction for the future? Which way do we have to go? And that is not easy to answer. This is, a little bit difficult. And of course, there is no such thing like a recipe. And we are not witches or magicians and can say, this is what you do. And the days where people said, well, wine is made in the cellar. No matter what you deliver on grapes, wine is made in the cellar. These days are over. And of course, nobody can look into the glass bowl, including me. But I think we have some indications of where we have to pay attention to. So the question is, what is coming and why? And I would like to do it the opposite way. I would start with why and what is coming as a result because of this. So 10 years ago, the why was, of course, climate change, technical progress, economical aspects of new versus traditional techniques. Here I would like to use as an example barrique versus chips, from an economical point of view, but also from a time point of view. So there were certain aspects which were important. The solution at the time, particularly for climate change, was acid addition and alcohol reduction. And that was is still pretty much standard. But now, still, of course, we have to talk about climate change, technical process and progress and all the economical aspects. But at the same time, we see a very much increased demand in the field of consumer protection. We see a change in consumer expectation. They want to have more information, way more information. We also see a much stronger international competition. All of a sudden, there are wine-producing countries in the market, which we have never thought of. There is also an international harmonization of rules and laws. And then, as I said, beginning of December 8 this year, we have new labeling issues. So we have to determine between processing aids or additives. Additives will need to go on the label, and processing aids will not go on the label. So what does that mean? All the traditional techniques which we have been using in the past, they might have to go on the label. And things like the addition of an acid, tartaric acid or malic acid or whatever you used, that needs to go on the label. And I'm not so sure that all the consumers will really like that. And maybe we do have some modern technologies which can replace that. And this is what we have. We have something which is called bipolar membranes, where you can just filter out potassium or calcium, and then you get more acidity in there, or you filter out some of the acid ions. and then you have a decrease. And there, it doesn't leave any residues in there, and it's a sort of filtration process, but it's technical. And particularly in the wine sector, we see a lot of very conservative attitudes there. And I'm pretty sure that we will see a change when it comes to the question of what to do about that. Then, of course, environmental issues play a very big role. The need of water. We also see the problem of more and more fires around the world. All the heat waves we have experienced now in Spain and also in other countries, and how to solve that. What can we do? Then it's also the question of sustainability, because in the past we were going from conventional to organic to biodynamic and so on. And now sustainability is the big word. And we have to notice, we have to recognize that everything what is organic is not necessarily sustainable. So what is more important in the future, organic or sustainable? Or do we find some sort of compromise between both of them? And in particular, when it comes to climate change, as we had a lot of rain this year, for example, in Germany, and then it got very warm, you have to go to the vineyards where you are producing organic grapes. You have to go out there way more often to do something about it. And that's definitely not more sustainable there. So there are still questions which need to be solved for the future. And people have to think about that. And another big issue is that we are really lacking well-trained staff, and that's more and more missing. So people who would like to work in that field, in that sector, that's going down. It's very hard to find well-trained people now working in the cellar and doing certain things. Also, for example, right now in the OIV, we are discussing, or we have defined what is an enologist. And the reason for that is that for very many techniques which are registered by the OIV, it says it can only be performed by an enologist or a qualified technician. And right now we are discussing the question of what is a qualified technician, because in the different member states, we have different education systems. And to find a compromise there is also not so easy. So for example, in Germany, people who would learn a job, they do work at the winery, but they're also like 3 weeks a month, and 1 month they spend in school. So they do have all the expertise, but that's not always recognized because it's not academic. So that are some of the issues which will definitely have a very strong impact on that, what we will be doing in the future. I don't think that this is a question of do we want that? We have to, because as I said, the artificial intelligence will take over some of the work we are doing. Many things will be more computerized because we don't have the people there. And what I always hear is that, well, big places, big wineries, they can do that, but for the small to producers, it's too expensive. And I don't think that's correct. I think that we will find small units in the future, and also companies who will come and do it for you, like custom services there. This is something what we might probably see in the future. So what problems should we expect then? First of all, no matter what kind of solution you find, somebody will say, wow, this is wonderful. And the next person will say, oh, this is the worst thing we can imagine. So it's not always possible to find the solution everybody is happy with. That's quite clear. So, but what we see is, and here the OIV comes back, the wine market is an increasingly globalized sector. More and more countries produce wine. The supply grows, it becomes more diversified, and the competition increases. And here we have to pay a lot of attention that the competition cannot only happen by lowering prices, because that would be the end of very many wineries, but also different products. And I find it quite interesting to see that in recent years, so many technologies from, let's say, the Caucasian areas, like using amphoras or quivers, that they are trendy because it's something new. So to offer something more. The wine consumption is getting more and more globalized. And here we can see that the consumption patterns have changed from a traditional to a more modern model. So for example, I always tell my students, my grandparents, they used to go to their producer in the Mosel at the time, once or twice a year, and they filled up the trunk of their car with wine, and that was it. And now you can go to the supermarket and you can buy wines from around the world. And this is, in every supermarket, more or less. And it's just really trendy to have friends over there. Oh, let's try a wine from wherever, because it looks, you look like an expert. And that's interesting to see. And I come back to that in a second. And consumers and also citizens have new expectations and concerns. They want to be better informed. And as a result of that, we will see the new labeling issues becoming end of the year. And people are more and more educated, and they have new demands. And when you see, at least in Germany, I can only talk about Germany now, that every supermarket now has a wine specialist, and who is, offering some wines, give some information. That's something very new, only for the last couple of years. And also, trade is also getting more and more globalized. And 10 years ago, 20% of the global wine consumed was imported. Now that's 40%. So people are more and more international now. And that's quite interesting. That's also maybe something to do with traveling, but also it's more the question of, doing something new, not being so old-fashioned. So what are the main challenges for the future? Of course, the environmental issues. I think I have a spelling mistake in there. The environmental concerns, but also the natural resources. What can we still use? And when you see that when we have used the global resources earlier and earlier each year, that's a big issue there. So how can we regain some of the resources we have been using and maybe, got rid of them by, putting them to the waste? Then also economic issues, improving the competitiveness, and supporting internationalization. And of course, the whole thing goes together with societal issues to respond to the expectations of consumers by what is the identity and authenticity of the product, the quality, food safety, and diversity. So when you see that all as a big thing, there is a lot what we have to do. There's a lot what we have to fulfill in the future. And we will see that is actually in particular these societal issues that will be more and more important also. Particular authenticity, how can we prove, and here again, method of analysis, that this wine is really coming from this region, that this is really a wine of whatever. So we need to have certain parameters here. I think quality is not a big issue anymore, because in general, quality has really gone up dramatically over the years because of the competitiveness. And it's really hard to find a really bad wine in the market. And food safety, as I already mentioned, Codex Alimentarius plays a very important role here. So just a few things, and my focus is not on viticulture, but what we see here, and this is what they're working on in the OIV, in viticulture, robotization. So what can they use in the vineyards? Not only a normal mechanical harvester, but also using drones, for example, to recognize specific plots or even vines where there might be a problem, and so that you can also not maybe spray an entire vineyard, but only the particular vine. So a reduction of pesticides and using more polarization techniques, and also, of course, precision viticulture. There are already drones out there now which can actually fly under the vines and remove all the non-grape stuff there, the non-vine stuff. Very interesting things. And here we have to communicate in a digital way with the weather stations. So what to do and how to react to that. And in the future, there also will be devices for measuring the amount of sugar per berry. for monitoring the ripeness on the plots. I think that in the near future, we will see a huge change there, in particular also in viticulture. Again, one of the reasons is you don't find people anymore to do that. You know, for us, harvest is starting, and when I started here my job, or when I was a student, I mean, even school holidays were, you know, very flexible so that everybody could go out and do the harvest. Now it's really hard to get people to do it. You know, they are coming from far away now, and finding people here in Germany to do it, except of the people who are already working here, forget it, not possible. So, but also we have to look into the accountable management of water, effluent, byproducts, and waste, which I already mentioned. Maybe we can do something with the lease, for example. Maybe there are other possibilities. Another big issue is new resistant cultivars, which are more tolerant to powdery or downy mildew or drought. So what we would call PVs, but also other varieties. Here, I think from an enological point of view, there are very interesting new cultivars out there already, but I think that we have to do a little bit more work in enology, because we just cannot treat them like a normal conventional variety. We might have to find some special production ways. Let me give you an example for that. We have a variety which is called Muscaris. And it has a little bit of muscatty character in there. In the first year, when we produced it here at our winery at the university, we have 36 hectares, so we are not too small. In the first year, we made it a dry wine. Nobody liked it. Second year, we made it a sweet wine. Nobody liked it. Then we made a Secco, and now everybody loves it. So there, maybe we have to find possibilities, you know, how to specifically deal with the different new cultivars. And then, of course, the rootstock breeding is still very important. And then they're also looking into new fungicide or pesticide molecules, which are in general, let's say, less dangerous for the environment, and which might go, which can be applied in smaller quantities and might directly go to the place where they need to be. And again, this in combination with drones can be very interesting. So the one other issue I would like to show you is, you know, everybody's only talking about this one here, the predicted temperature change. And as you can see, there are some here, the hot spots, and Spain was already suffering a lot, and also Italy, from the hot waves there. But you can also see there's predicted a hotspot over the Baltic Sea. Nobody can really explain at this stage why, but it's predicted there. And in the meantime, Denmark and Sweden are official wine-producing countries of the EU. So you see, we always believe that here, right under Schloss Johannisberg, there is the 50th degrees north, that you can't go further north than that. That's not true anymore. So we can go further north, and we can also go in higher elevations. But the big problem for us is actually this one here, because it shows you the variability. And then you can see in some of the major wine growing regions, this year, this is Germany there, in the major wine growing regions, the variability will be somewhere around 100%, which means, you know, the 100-year calendar, on this day you do this and this, and on this day you do that and that, that doesn't work anymore. And that makes it also so complicated to find all the solutions to the problems we are encountering in the vineyards, because that's what we are doing maybe today might be wrong tomorrow. If we do some leaf removal, we can't glue them on again the following day if it's necessary. So we have to find solutions there, how to deal with that. The only thing what's really constant now is that everything is extreme. It's extremely hot, it's extremely cold, it's extremely wet, it's extremely dry. So that really remains very constant there. And that's complicated. And we were just talking before we started the session here. Now they are thinking about photovoltaic in the vineyards, which can give some shade to the vines, gain energy, but also can be a protection against hail. So new things will definitely happen, and we are just at the start of all of this. And again, this year, and I'm saying it as an enologist, it would be wonderful if we could be, only focused on here, because a vineyard would be able to adapt slowly to a new situation. But when you have such a thing like a very high variability, that's also too much for a vineyard. So they cannot really react that quickly. And I want to show you some things what has happened, and that might explain also some of the issues we are facing. When we start here with this one, alcohol in California, and you can see that 71, and it stops at 2001. It's even higher now. You can see how it was, going up. Now you understand why they came up with the alcohol reduction. And we ignored that a little bit here. For us in the northern regions, it was wonderful that we got climate change there, because it definitely increased our quality. But now we have to say that also some wines, which were wonderful wines in the past, they don't exist anymore. Like when you think about the nice Mosel cabinets, with very low alcohol, super wines, very long lasting, they don't exist that way anymore. And you can also see that here for us, the sugar concentrations are going on up. And this is the yellow one is Mosel, and this is the state of Rheinland-Pfalz in general. Of course, there are some fluctuations in there, but in general, we see the trend, it's going up. And what should we do about that? When all of a sudden a Riesling has 15% alcohol, this is already sometimes the case in Austria when you go to Wachau, when you taste some of the very high quality wines there. Smaragd, I love them. I think they're wonderful, but when they are going above a certain alcohol level, it's hard to identify them as a Riesling. And we have some vineyards here between Rüdesheim and Assmannshausen, where it's already way too hot to grow Riesling there. So what to do there in the future? So very many problems. And this is a very interesting thing. This is why the Europeans, so for such a long time, really neglected a little bit the question of climate change, because 1 degree rise in temperature, average temperature, was connected to an increase in the wine ranking. When we look at the 100 points, sorry, that should be 100-point scheme, it's 1 degree more increased the ranking by 21.5% for Rhine, 20.8% for Mosel, but even for Burgundy and also for Bordeaux, it was good for the quality. So what we a little bit forgot over the time was that we might come to a peak where it's getting a little bit too much. And we have reached that peak now where it's really too much now. And then the question again is, what can we do? When some people say, yeah, but then you just harvest a little bit earlier. Yes and no. On the one side, yes, you keep the acidity, but you don't have the physiological ripeness there. And I always tell my students, when you're making a fruit salad, you're always looking for fruit which is ripe. And when you then take fruit where, when you take bananas, which can walk by themselves, and strawberries, which you have to chop, the average might be okay, but the different components are falling apart. And that's a big issue for us in the future. And also think about base wines for sparkling wines. When we are going so high in alcohol and we want to do a second fermentation, that's not so easy. And this is what they predict for Geisenheim. And you can see that since 2000, it's steadily going up. So we see the same scenario as everybody else in the world is seeing that. And at the same time, we also see that the acidity is going down, which has also a dramatic impact, not so much only for the taste, but also so far we need to have acidity in there because it has an influence on the pH. And so far we have only the chance to stabilize wines with SO2. And when we go above 3.6, 3.7, there is no microbiological effect of SO2 anymore. So the wines can't be stable. So the main reason for doing an acidification is actually to stabilize the wine. because then SO2 is working. One of my colleagues sitting here, Felipe from Chile, he's working on a replacement for SO2, which looks very promising so far, which is a mix of different tenants of botanical origin. And we are in the last steps of the last trials, and hopefully that will be accepted soon. It's already in the OIV step procedures, and that could be very much of help there, because then we are very much independent from a pH. So also, what is climate change doing to our weather? Very often, as I said, we were underestimating the seriousness. And since 1985, 36 summers were warmer than the mean between 61 to 90. So we are not really exaggerating. We also see that in addition to the change in climate in a region, the site-related differences are also of a particular viticultural interest. So really the sun exposure, everything what was south facing might be a little bit too hot now. We can see that some of the grapes are cooking there. And in particular, when from a viticultural point of view, when in the past it was a tradition that the last 2-3 weeks before you harvested, you removed the leaves in the fruit zone. You can't do that anymore because we get a sunburn. And sunburn in white wine might lead to pinking, which you also don't want, or to some very tannic, harsh wines there. So here, a lot of these things need to be adapted for the future. So, as I said, we are stuck in the middle of that. I thought this is an interesting thing here. This is Bordeaux, Bordeaux 1950, and this is Geisenheim. And we are there where Bordeaux was in the 80s. So this is when you look at the temperature. And of course, again, fluctuations in there. And so too many people just use that to say, well, there is no such thing like climate change. There definitely is. And we wish it would be not the case, but it is. So this is pretty much the same thing. And in 2030, we expect that we are the same level as Bordeaux. So here again, just to show you how complicated it is. When I was talking about the variation, the variability, and this really proves that what I showed you before, that the 100% is actually there. And it's very hard to really say, let's do this and this. And even for us in research, planning a special research project, you never know what's coming out of that. Because you might have a certain idea, but if the weather is against you and doesn't, support that what we want to do, then this can be a big problem there. So, and this is the same thing for rainfall and temperature. And rainfall after veraison leads to much faster and more damaging of grape rot than under cooler conditions. So when it's very humid and warm out there, and we were in the vineyards today, so it's in some areas it doesn't look a little bit scary. Most of it's still okay, but then of course we might have a problem. 2006 was an example of a turbo harvest. Believe me, in 2006 we had a Pinot Noir vineyard which we treated like a baby. I mean, that we didn't go out and polish the grapes individually was quite something. We went out there one day in the afternoon and decided to pick it the following day. And I have never seen something like that. The next morning, it was nearly 100% rotten. Boom, gone. A little bit of rain, warm temperatures, and this was really a big, big problem there. And of course, that has an impact on the composition of the ingredients, not only the aromas, but also on the wine profile. Here you can see an example. See, this is the same vineyard. This part here was irrigated, and this is how the grapes look. And this was non-irrigated, and this is the way the grapes look. And you can imagine what kind of wine was coming out of that. So now we could, of course, say, well, let's do irrigation. But what if we don't have the water for that? that's another issue. And I remember that in some areas in Austria, they spent a lot of money to implement these systems there, but they didn't get the water. And when we have really big drought, when we need to do an irrigation, there is not much water available. So we are not allowed to take it from the rivers because they're low anyway, and take it from some wells. It's always an issue. So water definitely is a big problem. And just think about, for example, Australia, where the prime minister decided the little bit of water they had available to what kind of crop this was going. And there might be some crop which is more important than mine, at least in the, in that what the politicians think. So of course, colleagues are working on some possibilities, what they want to do, and then maybe I don't want to go into that, but maybe my colleague Manfred Stoll can also do a presentation for you one day. And here there are different possibilities what one could do in the vineyard. And again, they are still working on that. So just looking at, leaf removal, where and how high it should be, and so on. So there are some strategies, of course. And again, I'm telling you that it's very hard because normally we have this very high variability in there. But for warm and dry years, leaf trimming and reduced canopy height would be the answer. And then if it starts raining, that might have been the wrong decision. And why? Less transpiration in area lead to lower water consumption and slower sugar accumulation, and of course some cluster thinning, you cut off the lower part. That again is an interesting strategy. When I was talking about waste, we've been doing some trials where we, this what we would call the green harvest, we turned into verjus and used this verjus for an acid addition. So not adding any tartaric or malic acid, we added some verjus and had some very positive results. It's not legal yet because, in order to call it a wine, it has to be at least the sugar concentration that it can make a wine. But this, I think, is something one should be looking into a little bit deeper. And it shouldn't be too difficult to get a change in the wine law there. And then in cooler years, when it's more rainy and cooler, ensure a good aeration in the fruit zone that it can dry out, and higher canopy. So these seasonal strategies are getting more important. But again, the problem is, what if we have a mix of this? All the strategies we think what we can do, when we have warm and rainy, or when it's dry and cool. Dry and cool is not so bad as warm and rainy. Again, reacting to all of that in the vineyard is more complicated, and we have to do something in the cellar. What we have established in Geisenheim is called phase. It's like an early tsunami warning. You can see these rings here. And this is for special crops, which means for some fruit, some vegetables, but also for vines. Here you see these rings. And here it's called BAG, Bordeaux, Adelaide, Geisenheim. It's a joint project there. And what we do there is we try to create an environment inside these rings, which is estimated or calculated as the greenhouse gas emission will be in 2050. So that we can already see what climate change will do to our crop. And that was planted a few years ago now, and we already see the first results. And so this is like a greenhouse more or less, but with no walls and no roof. It's in the free field there, so that we have really the conditions as it would be, so that we will get an idea about what to do about it. So we already know something about the soil, what's happening there, and we also see that the physiology of the vine is changing. And now, it had to be in production a little while, and now we are going in there from the side of enology as well. So adaptation strategies in the cellar. What can we do? What are our possibilities? I know I'm a little bit over time now, but give me please 2 more minutes or 5 minutes, and I'm done. So here again, we have to look into old and new technologies and treatments. And this is a very interesting thing because nobody's really willing to give up old strategies. You know, have a big thing there, and you just do the selection. But here we sometimes need to take out some of the old technologies. Excuse me. Data acquisition to define sustainability. You know, everybody's looking for now some documents which prove that you are working sustainable, but there's still a lot of data missing there. And we need to have something like decision-making tools for the production of a very desired product. And last but not least, method of analysis to really detect what grape variety is it, and also the authenticity of a wine, the origin. So we know that when we have higher temperatures, the grape ripening goes up, sugars go up, some of the flavonoids and flavonols, that has an impact there, which is not always positive, and the pH is going up. And going down is malic acid, nitrogen components, which we need to have as a yeast nutrient, anthocyanins are going down, the berry size, and also glucose-fructose ratio is there. So change, again, what can we do? How can we react to this? And this is still in the process of working here. The flavor components are affected. We see that wines which are produced with higher temperatures have more alcohol, and alcohol can also mask the aroma so that they are not really recognized anymore. And we see more, you know, when we just think about that, you know, when we talk about aroma, we are talking about 1 gram per liter, which is 0.1%. And this is already existing of somewhere around 900 flavors. So you can see how very, very small little parts can have a very dramatic impact. And really making a fake wine flavor because of all these interactions between the different flavors, that's not really possible. And sometimes when I see that now there are machines out there offering that they are making the perfect blend for you, I mean, you can measure what you have and you can have an idea about what you would like to have, but then doing the calculation of how much you need from the various wines in order to get there, that's never going to work, because what you cannot measure is the interaction between the different components in the wine. And thank God, this is still a job of winemakers, which, I personally really prefer. So, bitterness increases, as I said, the sensation of sweetness increases, body increases, and the wine bouquet goes down because, you know, it's over, there's some sort of layer over the bouquet. So problems and reactions, and then I'm really going to finish pretty soon. Low acidity,
Monika, I'd just like to say that some people may leave some people do have to leave promptly on the hour. So
okay, I'm really hurrying up. So
all right.
Sorry, the low acidity, as I said, acid addition in the future maybe more using the bipolar membranes. Alcohol reduction, we'll see more of that, but we can also already filter out some sugar before the fermentation, that's possible. And also for the environmental issues, we have non-allergenic fining materials, and we are working on new membrane processes which are able to really filter out selectively special components. There's already a unit out there which can filter out TCA, the cork flavor, the corkiness there, and we will see more of that in the future. And that again is the responsibility of the OIV. So this I will skip. And there are lots of possibilities out there to do the alcohol reduction. Small units, bigger units, everything is possible. And so far what we could see is that when we did 2% alcohol reduction with all the different techniques, there was actually no difference there for different wines. But, and this is now important, when we reduced the alcohol by 2%, there was no difference in triangle tests. This is something we found that found colleagues from around the world. But in particular, countries which were more on the south, they were not satisfied with the existing regulations, and they wanted to have a change. You know, in the EU at the beginning, or coming from OIV, it was 2%, and they said, yeah, but when we already have 17%, that's not enough. And then we had a change, and so that 20% reduction of the existing alcohol can still be called wine, but still no consensus. And now the EU has a new law, and when it's below 0.5%, it's not allowed to call it alcohol-free wine anymore. It needs to be de-alcoholized. And when we have 20% up to 20% alcohol reduction, it's wine. And when we have more than 0.5% and more than 20% alcohol reduction, it's partially de-alcoholized. But and then I think this is going to be the interesting thing for the market in the future, there are now new products possible with moderate alcohol levels. In the past, there was a gap between, sometimes some countries you could go up to 4%, but then it had to be a minimum of 8.5 in order to be a wine. And there was a gap between the 2 or 4%, depending on the countries, and the 8.5. And these products now with moderate alcohol levels, 5-6%, this is possible now. And also the wines are now, all these alcohol reduced wines are now part of the wine law. And in the past, it was food law. That has also changed. A big discussion right now is, will it be allowed to add the water back, which you take out, and also aroma, or not? Huge discussion. And I think in the future, we will probably use or need both, as we have it for juice. Juice is the 100%, and the nectar is where you can add something. And we need to properly identify that on the label, the wines which are very close to wine, which 100% follow the wine law, and products which might be a blend with some water and aroma, but that has to be marked on the label. So this is also a skip. Technical process, again, every enological treatment has its reasons, and it's based on the technical possibilities at the time. Nobody's inventing something just for fun. And as my dear colleague from former South Africa, now Australia, said, the Stone Ages did not end because all of a sudden they were running out of stones. So there is a possibility of doing something. And again, in particular, the European wine industry is very concerned about new developments, very emotional discussions. Where's the limit? How can that be determined? So this is still going on. And you know, as I already mentioned, all traditional techniques are also constantly reevaluated by the OIV. We might have to go back to some of the old things. And now I'm really no, this is what I wanted to show you. This is what the consumer wants. And we in Germany call that the egg producing wool milk pig. So they want to have everything. And that's very hard to get because the consumer wants transparent wines, no residue, healthy, labeling, traditional, sustainable, standardized, not too expensive, and so on. And this is very often only possible with new technical possibilities. So, and then I'm going to stop. So thank you very much for listening. And I apologize for talking a little bit too long, but I thought it might be interesting for you.
Thank you, Monika. That was actually very, very interesting. And it should actually probably have been 2 talks and not only 1.
Yes, I'm sorry.
There are a couple of points in the chat box which you might want to address. Andrea can go through those with you, but I have to take my leave here. So thank you so much, Monika, for sharing all your vast knowledge with us. I learned a lot this evening, and maybe have a copy of your presentation.
Sure.
Okay, if you can send it to Andrea, that'll be great.
Yes.
For those of us who want it. And I wish you all, well, you in America, a lovely day. You in Europe, a nice sunset. And for me, a good night.
Thank you, Bruni. I'd just like to quickly just say thank you to Sue Eames, who introduced Monica to us, and also to Liz Saggies for organising the event. There are a few, well, as Winnie has said, I'll put the once I've got the presentation, I can load that on to the website so that anybody can just go through the pages that Monica didn't go through, and I'm sure there's probably some questions there. There were there's a few questions here. We can probably just take 5 or so minutes just to do that for those that'd like to just stay on. I know there was the first question was regarding about the US not being a member, but I think Keith addressed that or replied to that, and so did Winnie, saying that you said that there was a technical issue as to why the USA left, Monica, and it's probably a much bigger discussion, is it?
Okay, do we have another 2 hours?
No.
No, the issue was that in the US, they were already a little bit more advanced, let's say. They knew about all the big problems concerning climate change, and they felt that all their needs were not really recognized. And so that really, at the time I was working in the US, so I was part of actually the American delegation there. And then also there was a little problem that one of the candidates they presented, who would have been a wonderful candidate for presidency, was not elected for some stupid reasons there. And that's the reason why they left. And we really hope they will come back one day.
Yes, I'm sure you're not alone in that view.
Well, Texas is nearly half of the state anyway, so, you know, that's fine.
Yeah.
Dominic Buckwell has got a quick question. Dominic, do you want to ask your question?
Hi, Monica. Yeah, I'm Dominic. You don't know me. I've only been involved in wine for about the last 6 or 7 years, but I did see you speak at the Cool Climate Symposium in the UK. So I'm a Brit. I live in southern England. I got interested in wine partly because of the English wine movement. And the only good thing from Brexit, as far as I'm concerned, is that it forced the UK to rejoin the OIV.
Yeah.
And because they had to say we've now got influence on the laws that we're going to be following under the trade continuity agreement, the Brexit deal. So I've been appointed by DEFRA as one of the legal experts to the Law and Economy Commission. So I've attended a few meetings, and it's remarkably collegiate considering how political it is. But it does strike me that there's this big divide between France, Italy, Spain, and Germany, although it's within the EU, seems more open-minded. And then the New World countries, so Australia, New Zealand, and South Americans, who are desperately trying to get more influence, but feel they're very dominated by the EU rules, because if anything's passed by the EU, it's kind of imposed on them. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on this kind of quasi-imperialism that might be felt by the Southern Hemisphere about the OIV.
Well, you know, I think everybody has reasons why they have a special opinion about something. I mean, they're not doing it just for fun. There's a reason for that. And we have to pay attention to all the needs. And this is why in the OIV, everything has to happen by consensus. That was not the case in the past. So it's sometimes, and that I might want to add as well, is a little bit difficult because in the EU, there is still some sort of internal discussion, and countries in the EU which might have a certain opinion and present this opinion in the OIV, they might get overruled when they have the meeting in Brussels and then have to go for a different thing. But again, because of the consensus issue, it doesn't make a difference there. So, and that's quite helpful. When the consensus was introduced at the beginning, I thought, oh my God, we're never going to come up with a resolution in the future. But it's working actually quite well. We could also see a disadvantage during the time of COVID when we could not meet in person, because very often we need the coffee breaks just to talk to our colleagues and say, hey, what do you think about that? And can we solve it this and this way? And then normally it works out. When we have an understanding why certain things, and now we understand much better because we are now in the same situation as countries where before us 10 years ago. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm not sure, Keith, did you want to raise anything with Monica? just I've got another couple of minutes. 10 past.
Yeah,
I'll have to switch
thank
to
you.
10 past.
Monica, I'm hugely supportive of the work of the OIV, but there's got a slight discomfort here. And what I'm looking at, that the wine world, in many ways, more globalized, standardized, more highly technical. But it's interesting that winemakers, even large wineries, now speak of minimal intervention, and the only real growth area is in natural wines, often by producers who wish to break the rules. And this doesn't sit comfortably in many ways with tighter and tighter regulation. And looking at ingredients labelling, which I am totally against. In theory, I love the idea, but I'm totally against, because in fact people will have a look and say, oh, this doesn't sound good. The most harmful things in wine are not added, they're metabolized by use very often: ochratoxin A, ethyl carbamate, biogenic amines, etc. So I actually think that is a step backwards. And regulation, in many ways, and now the EU law and the OIV are pretty much isomorphic. Regulation isn't the answer. I look back to when EU wine laws were first formed, particularly when the disastrous 1971 German wine law came in. They listened to the big producers, the people who make an industrial wine, and the people who wanted to go a different road were completely ignored. Thus the rise of the super Tuscans and everyone breaking the rules.
See, the issue is, as I mentioned before, the OIV is an intergovernmental organization. So members are states, and we have not only producing countries, but also consuming countries. And they have very different understanding of what they want to see and what they want to have. So they are actually bringing way more in when it comes to consumer protection and information. So this is really a push from that side. And unfortunately, we also experience very often that, and I can only speak from my own experience here. And I want to give you an example. I was contacted by one of the major German TV stations. They wanted to do something about the dirty tricks in winemaking. So they had a very specific opinion about that. And no matter what I told them, they were not interested in that. All the negative things were good. And I tried to show that, you know, when something is adopted by the OIV, that it has really been proven a lot, that this is okay. And I think that the new technologies in the future, yeah, they are more technical, but on the other side, they are also, I would say, they leave less residues in the product, and not everything what we used in the past was good. So maybe we have some much better options there in the future. We are always reacting with the possibilities of the time. And the labeling issues there, again, is coming from that push for the information. I'm also not happy about that. But on the other side, I also hear that people say, yeah, do we have to hide anything? Is there anything illegal you are using? I was contacted also by somebody who wanted to write an article about, you know, what goes into wine. And it was a lady, and she said, yeah, there's this entire list of what you could use, you know. And I said, yeah, but it's not a checklist. And she didn't want to hear that. I said, no. I said, when you get up in the morning, you take a look outside and you think, oh, the weather is like this. Then you go to your cabinet and then you make a decision. What are you going to wear this day? You're not going to put on 20 pants just because you have them. You know, it's a selection of certain things. And of course, the question of these natural wines, it's partly a philosophy, which I accept, but it's also very often a marketing thing. And we just did some investigation. A colleague of mine from the food chemistry department at the University in Hamburg checked that, and some of that stuff what's in the market, she said it's life-threatening. I mean, this is not always good. So you talked about biogenic amines and things like that. I mean, for microorganisms, it's an El Dorado in there, what they could do. And there are also producers out there who know what they are doing, and they pay a lot of attention. But I think that it's a small market niche, and it's not gonna. It's interesting for now. It's the same with creveres and amphoras and stuff like that. But I don't think it's something which will last forever, at least in our regions here.
Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. I think some very thought-provoking points made there. And as a lot of people have said here, that they've thanked you very much, Monica, for a tremendous presentation. Obviously, too much information for us all to squeeze in and take in there, I think. So, but thank you very much for all your time and for giving us such a great presentation today. And I look forward to receiving your presentation that I can put on our site for the members to see. But thank you very much indeed, and thank you to those of you who stayed on for the remaining the last 13 minutes. Anyway, it's nice to see you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and again I apologize for being too long.
No problem at all. Thank you, Monica. Bye, everybody.